On a limestone island in the eastern Mediterranean, in a cave above a dry valley, the bones lay undisturbed for nearly 3,000 years. The skull was large, larger than any human skull. The brow ridge was a single fused arch across the center of the forehead. A deep, dark socket lay beneath it. To the men who first found bones like these, the conclusion was obvious. They had found the remains of a giant, a creature with one eye. The Greeks called it the Cyclops, the round-eyed one. In the 8th century before our era, the poet Homer set down the oldest written account. The hero, Odysseus, blown off course on his return from Troy, lands on the shore of an unknown island. In the hills above the beach, he finds a cave. Inside the cave, he finds milk, cheese and pens of sheep, the household of a pastoralist. And then he meets the pastoralist, a giant, 2.5 meters tall, one eye in the center of his forehead. His name was Polyphemus. The story is dismissed today as fiction, a piece of invented geography to entertain a sailing audience. But the description is unusually specific. The diet, the cave dwelling, the sheep herding, the cooperative pastoral society of the island, the single brow, the 2.5 meter stature. Homer is not describing a god, he is describing an animal. What if Homer was right? This is the case for Homo cyclopaeus, the Aegean Cyclops, a relict hominin of the Mediterranean limestone caves, observed across 3,000 years of Aegean coastal culture and dismissed from the zoological record for being too strange to believe. The earliest written record is the Odyssey, composed in oral form around the 8th century BCE and committed to writing perhaps a century later. In Book 9, Odysseus describes the creature with a precision that has not been matched by any later account. Polyphemus, he says, has the body of a great man, but disproportioned. The forehead is fused, the single deep eye is sunk beneath a heavy brow. The voice is human, but coarse. The hands are too large. The creature speaks a language Odysseus understands, broken Greek. But his vocabulary is limited. He is described not as a god, but as a being the gods have permitted to live. A relict. A century or so earlier, in Hesiod's Theogony, the Cyclopes appear as a category, 3 of them primordial working bronze. By the 5th century BCE, Greek red figure pottery has fixed the iconography. The Cyclops is consistently rendered as a large male with a single forehead eye, often holding a club or carrying a sheep. The image is stable for half a millennium. It does not drift in the way fictional monsters drift across the same period in Greek art. 2,500 years later, in 1914, the Austrian paleontologist Othenio Abel offered a competing explanation. Excavating Mediterranean cave deposits, he had found the skulls of Palaeoloxodon falconeri, a dwarf elephant the size of a large dog, which had lived on the same islands and gone extinct in the late Pleistocene. The central nasal cavity of the elephant skull is large, deep, and reads to an untrained eye at distance as a single enormous eye socket. Abel's theory was elegant. The Cyclops, he said, was a misread elephant skull. The case has been quietly accepted ever since, but it does not explain the rest of Homer's account, and it does not explain what continues to be found in the caves. Under the proposed classification, the species is designated Homo cyclopaeus, the Cyclops human. It is a hominin, not a god, not a giant of legend, not a mythological category. A speciated member of the genus Homo, isolated from Homo sapiens in the Mediterranean basin and surviving as a relict population into recorded antiquity. Within the genus, its closest analogues are the late surviving Pleistocene relict hominins, of which we now know several. Homo floresiensis, the dwarf hominin of Flores in Indonesia, survived alongside modern humans on its island until roughly 50,000 years ago. Homo luzonensis on Luzon in the Philippines survived to a similar horizon. The Denisovans persisted in Siberia and Tibet until at least 30,000 years ago. In each case, isolation on terrain that Homo sapiens did not initially occupy permitted a distinct hominin lineage to persist alongside us, often for tens of thousands of years. The Mediterranean basin offered exactly that terrain. The limestone karst geology of Sicily, Cyprus, Crete, and the southern Greek mainland is riddled with deep cave systems, many connected, all temperature stable, all defensible, and all rich in groundwater. These caves were not occupied by early Homo sapiens in the way the coastal terraces were. They were, however, ideal refugia for a species that preferred them. The Aegean Cyclops was cave-dwelling. The Odyssey describes Polyphemus's cave in close detail, a large chamber with pens for sheep and goats, vessels of milk, racks of cheese, a hearth at the center. Recent excavations in remote Sicilian caves have recovered exactly this assemblage. Pen walls of stacked stone, hearths with charred bone, storage pits. Dated to the late Pleistocene and into the early Holocene, and not associated with any known Homo sapiens culture of the period. The defining anatomical feature is the cranium. The frontal bone is fused along the midline into a single broad arch, the brow ridge thicker and lower than in Homo sapiens, eliminating the central depression that, in our species, separates the two orbital cavities. Beneath this fused brow, the two eyes are set unusually close together, analogous in modern terms to the extreme brachycephalic morphology seen in some domestic dog breeds, though derived through entirely different evolutionary pressures. From frontal aspect at close range, the two eyes are visible as a single horizontal slit. From distance, or in poor cave light, they read as one. This is the source of the legend. Homer or his sources were not lying. They were describing the face of a real hominin at the resolution available to a frightened observer. Behaviour was pastoral. Adult males are estimated at 2.5 to 3 meters in height, with the females considerably smaller, a sexually dimorphic species, more so than H. sapiens. The males appear to have specialized in defense and herding of large stock, sheep, goats, and possibly small dwarf bovids, while the females and juveniles maintained the cave systems. Cooperative herding has been inferred from cave mouth pen layouts that imply coordinated grazing rotation across the surrounding terrain. Stone tool use was sophisticated. The hand axes found in the candidate cave layers are not Aegean. They are larger with a different flake pattern, designed for a grip wider than the human. They are clearly tool-shaped. They are clearly not human-shaped. Diet, accordingly, was pastoral and lithic. Milk, cheese, butchered stock, supplemented by forage plant material from the limestone slopes. There is no evidence of agriculture. There is also no evidence of long-range trade. The species appears to have lived within a few days' walk of its cave system across its entire life. Adult stature is the second consistent detail across the Greek sources. 2.5 meters is the figure given by Homer. 3 meters is the figure implied by some of the 5th century pottery. The fragmentary skeletal material recovered from Sicilian and Cypriot caves over the past century, long classified as anomalous and rarely re-examined, falls within that range. Reproduction was slow. The species reached sexual maturity at approximately 18 to 22 years of age, with single births at long intervals. This is consistent with island and refugium populations across the late Pleistocene, and consistent with a population that survived in small numbers over a long horizon rather than expanding to compete with Homo sapiens. The evolutionary history of Homo cyclopaeus is, like its closest analogues, a story of island isolation in a Pleistocene world. The Mediterranean basin during the last glacial maximum, roughly 26,000 years ago, was a different landscape. Sea levels were as much as 120 meters lower than today. Many of the islands, Sicily, Crete, Cyprus, were either connected to the mainland by land bridges or separated by narrower straits than the current configuration suggests. A hominin lineage that entered the Mediterranean basin in the Middle Pleistocene, perhaps 500,000 years ago, could have spread across the region and then, as the seas rose at the end of the last glaciation, become trapped on individual islands. The Mediterranean is also unusual in one important respect. Its islands experienced extraordinarily strong endemic evolution. Sicily and Crete during the late Pleistocene hosted dwarf elephants, dwarf hippopotamuses, and giant dormice, animals whose forms were dictated by the resources of small, isolated land masses. The dwarf forms shrank toward the lower bound of their lineages. Some mainland forms, freed from larger predators, grew larger. Homo cyclopaeus, on this account, is an example of insular gigantism in a hominin. A slow, low-population, large-bodied, derived form of an ancestor that arrived from the African continent 1,000,000 years earlier. The fused frontal bone may itself have been a thermoregulatory adaptation. Mediterranean limestone caves are cool year-round, but the surface terrain experiences intense summer heat. A thickened, fused brow may have provided shade for the eyes and reduced reflected glare from white limestone slopes during the long pastoral hours of the herding day. It is a plausible lineage. It is consistent with what we know of relict hominin survival elsewhere, and it is consistent with what was, for 3,000 years, the most famous monster in European literature being, in fact, a cousin we did not recognize. In 2010, a cave excavation on the lower slopes of Mount Etna in Sicily recovered a fragment of frontal bone with an unusual morphology. The fused midline arch was extreme. The orbital position was anomalous. The bone was dated to approximately 12,000 years before the present. Late Pleistocene, on the very horizon at which Homo sapiens should have been the only hominin remaining in the region. The find was attributed at the time to pathology. It has not been re-examined. A larger fragmentary assemblage was recovered in 2018 from a sea cave on the western coast of Cyprus. Long bones in the assemblage fall within range for a hominin of 2.5-meter adult stature. The cranial fragments include another fused frontal bone. The find has been published once in an obscure venue. It has not been replicated. Mitochondrial DNA recovered from cave sediment samples on Crete and in the southern Peloponnese has, since 2019, returned a small number of sequences that match neither Homo sapiens nor any known hominin reference genome. The sequences are short. They are degraded. They could be contamination. They could also be the genetic signature of a Mediterranean lineage that has not yet been formally described. In the remote villages of Mount Taygetos in the southern Peloponnese, of Mount Pelion in Thessaly, and in the interior of Crete, the old folklore continues. Cave-dwelling giants, lost sheep, Stones moved at the entrance of high mountain shelters. The accounts are not believed. They are also not new. Othenio Abel was probably right that the Greeks misidentified some elephant skulls. Both can be true. The story can have two sources at once. The Cyclops has never been formally described. No type specimen has been deposited. No genome has been sequenced. The caves of the Aegean are deep. They are temperature stable. They are connected, and they have been very lightly examined.